Hey everyone, welcome to the 60th Easy JavaScript tutorial, part of easyprogramming.net. Today I want to go over something that other people have asked me to cover a while ago. I haven't been doing a lot of JavaScript tutorials lately, but I thought I would show you a couple of these questions. So, quick demo of what's going to happen is we're going to create a simple autocomplete library in vanilla JavaScript. This probably shouldn't be used in production. This is just for learning purposes, just to show you how modules work, how recursive functions work. You can put it all into an actual working app, because I've shown you all of these different topics individually. So here, this is just a list of 2019 and 2020 cars. It's in a JSON file somewhere. So if I start typing in like Toyota, it gives me all of these information, right? So, and see there's a Toyota Highlander hybrid. If I start typing in 2020, it gives me all the 2020 modules. If I type in Corolla, it gives me all the Corolla modules, Corolla vehicles, etc. It's very simple. So I'm using HTML data lists. I'll show you what that is. You can find all of this code on GitHub. The 4 main topics you'll need to know is JavaScript modules, crawling JSON with recursive functions. So I'll be copying and pasting my own code here. So if you want a deep dive into how recursive functions work and how to crawl a JSON object or an array of JSON objects, watch this tutorial here. In this tutorial, just going over how to combine all these little pieces into one library. This will hopefully also give you an idea of how to create your own libraries, how to make coding a little bit easier for you, since that's been my main focus over the past few months, to try and make things easier for me. So we're going to look at the code. In the past, I've used brackets for my JavaScript, so I've moved on to Visual Studio Code since it's a lot nicer in my opinion. It comes with a lot more tools, including a plugin that you can use to an extension you can use to it's called Live Server, that you can use to launch a development environment. So that's what I'm using for my live server here. So you can see it's 127.0.0.1 port 5500. I have a couple of files here. The first file is the HTML file. I won't go over most things here. It's very simple. I'm using Bootstrap. I'm not the greatest designer, so I just use Bootstrap for most of my things. I'm using Bootstrap 5 for the layout. Most of this layout is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So the one thing I will go over is the data list. The only thing you need to know about data list is that it's just like select options in HTML. You have an input type, and then you say what the list is. So this is the autocomplete list here, and you define it in a data list tag here with options. So this is the default. So if I go back here, you can see the item 1, item 2. So the cars have been removed. So it's just item 2. There we go. So for us, we are using Main.js as our main JavaScript file, and it's of type modules. So if you want an in-depth tutorial on JavaScript modules, I have that as well somewhere here. They're here, intro to JavaScript modules. It's pretty straightforward. In our JavaScript modules folder, we have a couple of lines. So since we're using modules, we'll be using Autocomplete.js. So this is what we'll create. It'll be pretty simple. We're importing all of it, and we're using window on load. So when the page loads, when the window loads, we have a couple of objects. So this library will be able to both differentiate between arrays, lists of arrays, as well as crawl JSON objects as complex as this. We already assigned our autocomplete list element to this L variable. I'm going to get rid of this, just hide it so that it's not used. So once we're here, we are ready to start coding our autocomplete library, our autocomplete JavaScript file. So here we're going to do a couple of things. So we're going to create a method called autocomplete, and it will take a few arguments. The arguments will be object, element, and field. So the object will be whatever we pass. It'll be either the array or the object. And if we're getting something from an AJAX, it'll be the response from that AJAX query. The element is where we will attach the output. So here it's L, just calling it L for to keep it in sync. and then the field. So this is only necessary if we're sending in an object and has properties like name, job, location, etc. We want to be able to tell our autocomplete library which field to look for. With arrays, there's no field. It's a comma separated values list of items. So we need to make the field optional. So we'll just say the optional is null. So if it's not passed, it'll be null, so that if anyone else uses your library, you can make that as an optional field. So I'm going to do let output. So we need an empty array because we'll be going through the array. We're going to store our outputs into this array, parse through it, and then output it into our data list options here. So if field is not null, so that means if it is an object, if it's this format, what we want to do is we want the output to go through the parser. So we have the search nested JSON parser, so it'll go through that, which we will create, which I'll just copy and paste. So the method we need to call is convert object to array. Don't worry, we haven't defined this yet. So we'll send it the object and the field. So it'll be the object that's being passed to autocomplete and the field that's being passed to autocomplete. Else, so if field is null, if it is not defined, what we'll do is we'll just say output equals to object. So output will just be whatever the array is. It's just a simple declaration here. Next thing we need to do is we need to check if our output is an actual array, right? So that we don't run into errors later if something happens here. So we'll just do array is array output. So if it's a valid array, if the output is a valid array, because what if the object we're sending is not a valid array, we want to be able to handle that as well. We'll say, L inner HTML. We will clear the inner HTML here so that if there's anything there, otherwise it'll just keep appending. We'll do output dot for each. So this is where the for each comes in. For each item, we will let's create an element called option, because that is what the data list uses. So we'll use option. So we'll do let opt equals to document dot create element create option. Oops. We'll do opt dot text. It'll be the item, right? So if the item is like Toyota, it'll be the item. And then opt dot value will also be the item. So this is the difference here. So these two options don't have the value. So if you want to make sure that the value is something that you can send to a backend service later, you might want to keep it separately. But for the purposes of the demo, I'm just keeping it as is. I just want to show you that when you create an option element, you have two options, two attributes that you can assign. So we'll just make them both item. Doesn't matter. You can also do like item, plus val or something, but let's not do that here. And then once we're done, we will append, option to our element, which was our autocomplete list, data list. So now you see why you have to clear it first. Otherwise, if for some reason this method gets called again multiple times, we'll just keep adding to the list and it'll get super duper long. Okay, so that's it so far. So let's review what happened so far. So we have this list. We're going to pretend like we didn't send it, but we will send, let's say, array. It has all of these people here. Since the object is an array, since the field is null, it will skip this and it'll just assign our output to object. We will go through the list and the item will just be assigned to the text and the value for the option. If we're sending it an object, JSON, an array of JSON objects, it'll parse through, which we will create here, this method in a second, and it'll assign output to that, and then it'll go back to check to make sure it's an array, and do all of this again. So let's create our convert object to array method. So convert object to array, great. We're sending an object and field. Okay, so here is when I'm going to copy some of my code. So I'm not going to copy it from here. I do have it written down somewhere else. I'll just briefly explain what I did. So we need, just like here, we need a blank array to store things in. So we'll just do array output. And then now I'm just going to copy and paste this. So the output of this, all of this is very similar to here. So it checks to see if the property is of type object. If it is, it'll go through this little function that's created inside this other function. So we have a function, well, we have a method within a method. So if it is an object, it'll go through. Otherwise, if it is not an object, if the property matches the field, let's say we're passing in name, if property matches field, it will add our entire object property into our array output. And it'll just keep doing it. It'll go through it until it goes through the entire object. So again, if you want a more detailed tutorial, readme walkthrough on how this recursive function works, check out this tutorial here. I do go in depth into what's happening here. And then here, we need to call this interior method once at least. So we'll call it here. Once it does that, that's it. And then we will return array output. Okay, so now array output will be here. Pretty simple. Or if you get confused, do let me know. Like once you see this, it might start making more sense. Just start stepping through the code once you get it. So we have our autocomplete JavaScript file created. So all done in vanilla JavaScript. So since we're working with modules, we need to export this autocomplete. That part is pretty simple. So we'll just do export autocomplete. Let's end this. There we go. So now, if we go back here, when we do import, all this AS, it's here. Our main.js has access to all of these methods here, and the only thing we need, it really is autocomplete, right? So let's test stuff out. So we have this here. So what we want to do is we'll do ac.autocomplete. See, now it's available. It's we can autocomplete this, right? And it tells you what kind of fields you need. It's one of the things I like about Visual Studio. It works well. So it's looking for object of type any. We're not using strict mode, so that doesn't really matter. It's looking for element of type any, and then field. You see the question mark? That means it's optional. So autocomplete. So the object we're going to send, let's send it array at first, and then the element is L. So that's all we need to do here. So if things work, our autocomplete will work on our text field. So let's go here. Let's refresh this. I think it auto refreshed. Look at that: Tony, Wanda, Cosmo, Steve, Natasha, Xavier. Pretty cool, right? So if I add myself, I refresh this. There you go. I'm here. So there you go. Very simple, right? So the array part at least is very simple. So now we're going to test to make sure that it can also parse through our objects, our JSON, and give us what we need. So I'm just going to comment that out. We'll do autocomplete again. This time for the object, we'll send in object element, and then for the field, let's send in name. Sure, why not? Okay, save this. There you go. Bill and Nazmus. Right. So if I replicate this, say say Tony. I'm not gonna put anything else. There you go. It appears here. So our JavaScript file, our autocomplete.js, is successfully doing the recursive function here and outputting an array that our HTML understands in a data list format. So if I inspect this, you can see the data list is here, right? So, and if I go back, if I change this from name to city, as you can see, we have an inner city here, inside location, city here. I'm just gonna change this to, I know the state doesn't make any sense, I'll do New York City. Go back here, refresh, auto refreshed, data list. You can see the value here, so this is where the value comes from, New York City, and it auto completes. Again, data list isn't the best way to do autocomplete library. It's not very pretty. It just uses your browser's built-in, I don't even know what this is called, the hover, the tooltip, or whatever, to get the autocomplete done. Okay, so those are the two out of the three ways of doing this. Third way is going to be, well, which was one of the questions, is can we get a list of data, list of like all of this from, I'm just going to get rid of this, make it a little bit smaller. This from an AJAX call from somewhere on the internet. If you have a backend service, it gives you a backend service. We're going to simulate a backend service. So I have a cars.json file. So this list I actually got from backforapp.com. It's pretty good data here. So this is mostly for testing. So you can query cars here. You can query. They have other data as well. You can query them and get a list in JSON format. It's pretty neat. So I thought I'd get that instead of trying to generate something huge. So it has a couple of thousand lines, right? 5,000 something lines. I have it here. So this, I needed the object ID. It outputs it automatically. But the things I'm just gonna worry about are, year, make, model. That's it. One beautiful thing about this Autocomplete.js library is that it's ready. I don't have to touch it ever again. So as long as I include it in other JavaScript files, I can use the autocomplete method pretty neatly, and it'll just return an array. And with that array, it'll return an array of options, of element options, so I can take that and do whatever else I want with it. You can always change this to just return a basic array, and you can parse it out later. So I'm just going to do this. So here, I'm going to create a couple more methods. So I'll create a method called resp, right, short for response, and we'll use the fetch API for JavaScript. Cars.json. So this, it doesn't matter that I'm accessing a local file, even if it was online, like google.com/cars.json, that won't happen. This API will work the same way. I'm just simulating it by using the fetch method here instead of like importing it in my JavaScript or something and reading that file. So yeah, works out with promises. So we'll do then. Once we get a response back from there, we're going to do response.json. So we're going to get the JSON out of the response here. Response.json. Once that happens, we're going to get the data from there. And we need to process the data. So we can call it like process fetched and data. So what this will do is it'll grab everything here. It'll get the JSON values. It'll get the JSON values from the response. After that's done, it'll get the data, and it'll send it to a method called process fetch that we will define right now. So to let process fetch data. Oops. So we're going to use the map method here. So we'll do data.map so that we are manipulating each of the items that we see here. So each of these, this is an item and this is an item, etc. So because I want the output to be a certain way, so we'll say item let's say item dot car. Yeah, that's what I'll use. So I'll use car here. So if you're wondering what this is a template literal. You can get more information on MDN, which is just, instead of doing something like used to item.car equals to item.year plus item.make. I can do item.year, item.make, item.model. So I can do all of this instead of having to do plus space blah blah blah. So I can just do it all in one go here. So with using the backticks. So this isn't a regular quote. There we go. So template literals are super easy. So once our item.car, so the item.car doesn't exist, right? So we're creating that value. You can see the object has year, make, object ID, model, created at and updated at. So we're creating a new value, a new attribute called car, and then we're going to return item. So now every piece of data here will have something called car equals to 2020 Acura RLX, RLX in it. Control Z. Okay. So now once we have the items here, data will have processed and processed all of this, and every piece of data will have the item. So we'll do ac.autocomplete data. So that's what we're sending. So that data is our object this time. Element will still stay element, and our value, or the field that we're sending in it, is car, because that's what we just created. So now if we save this, if we refresh this, I go back here, there you go, they all appear. If I do this, look at the data list here, they're all here. They all have the value, they all have the name, and the format is year, make, model, as shown in the template literal here. Pretty cool. I think if I put a space here, then it shows the value as well. For our purposes, since they're both the same, you don't need that space there. Get rid of it, and it's just the line. So if we start doing Toyota Camry, you get all the Camrys. Prius, you get all the Priuses. Ferrari, does it have Ferrari? No, it doesn't have Ferrari. Porsche, it does have Porsche. So anyways, there you go. So pretty simple. I know this was a really long video, but I hope that this was useful. I hope it helped you learn how to create a really simple library. This is a super reusable code. So it's only 40 lines of code, without any comments or anything. You can compress this a little bit more if you want. You can turn this convert array to object into its own library, export it somewhere else, and include it whenever you need to parse JSON in a recursive function. Where to download some test data, some Main.js. That's another 40 lines of code, 39 lines of code, 38 lines of code. And if you don't need the objects here, you don't need it. And I'll show you that. If we refresh, it uses the fetch to get cars.json here. So if I open a new tab, so it is doing like a quick AJAX call here. I will link to all of the 4 things that you'll need to know for this tutorial down in the description and on easyprogramming.net. So be sure to check those out. Check out all of them. This was my 60th JavaScript tutorial. I don't know if I'll ever get to 100. I'm not making these as much as I used to, focusing a lot more on Raspberry Pi, but keep practicing. If you have questions, let me know. I hope this was useful. Not the best looking one, but if you do end up using it, let me know. And again, this is not great for production purposes. There's a lot of libraries out there that already do autocomplete libraries, so thanks for watching. Have a great one.